The second time my stepmother asked me to erase my first report card, I was already dead enough to understand what she meant. She was not worried about the red C beside handwriting. She was not embarrassed by the teacher's note saying I rushed when I felt frightened. She wanted the back of the card scrubbed clean, because one faded sentence placed her in the only building she had sworn under oath she had never entered. In my first life, I obeyed her. I watched the ink dissolve beneath a cotton pad while Lenora Quinn stood over me, smiling as if she were teaching me how to remove a stain. 18 months later, she used the absence of that sentence to destroy me. 3 years after that, I died in a locked hospital room with her alibi still intact. Then I opened my eyes at 26 again, seated at my father's dining table, with the untouched report card resting beside my hand and Lenora saying, "Alara, darling, erase that before anyone sees it." This time I smiled. "Of course," I said. "Let me fetch the right solvent." Then I slipped the original beneath my blouse, carried a decoy upstairs, and began planning the collapse of a woman who had survived for 19 years because everyone believed paper was weaker than memory. The card had arrived that morning in a cedar box from my maternal grandmother's estate. Grandmother Iris had died 2 weeks earlier, leaving me old photographs, school certificates, 3 letters, and a brass key with no label. My father had received property. Lenora had received jewelry. I had received objects nobody in the Quinn family considered valuable. That was why Lenora opened the box in front of everyone without hesitation. She lifted each item with 2 fingers, made a soft sound of pity, and told me Iris had always been sentimental. When the report card appeared, yellowed at the edges and folded once through the center, Lenora laughed. "Your first academic disaster." My half-sister Sloane leaned across the table, expecting something humiliating. My father barely looked up from his phone. I remembered every second because I had lived it before. In my first life, I had flushed when Sloane read my marks aloud. Reading, satisfactory. Arithmetic, excellent. Handwriting, needs improvement. Conduct, inconsistent during periods of distress. Lenora had waited until everyone lost interest before drawing my attention to the note on the reverse. "That old ink will transfer onto the other papers," she had said. "Clean it off." I believed her, because children trained to seek approval often continue, obeying long after they become adults. This time, I saw the small twitch beneath her left eye. It came before fear entered her voice. Fear was the first truth she had ever offered me. I carried the decoy upstairs, locked my bedroom door, and took the original from beneath my blouse. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and dust. My first grade teacher, Miss Bell, had written the visible message in blue fountain pen. "Alara is observant, imaginative, and unusually alert to changes in adult behavior. She becomes anxious when routine shifts without explanation." Beneath that, in a different hand and darker ink, was the sentence Lenora had once ordered me to erase. "Student released at 4:12 p.m. to Ms. Lenora Pike after emergency call regarding Dr. Miriam Hale. Identification confirmed by office." Lenora Pike was my stepmother's maiden name. Dr. Miriam Hale was my mother. The date printed at the top of the report card was October 18th, 19 years earlier, the afternoon my mother suffered the laboratory exposure that led to her death. Lenora's official story placed her in Zurich that entire week, attending an international diagnostics symposium. She had repeated it to police, insurers, journalists, my father, and later to a civil court. Photographs showed her beside a conference banner. A hotel invoice showed 4 nights in Switzerland. A passport copy bore a departure stamp. Her alibi had been clean enough to become family scripture. Yet my report card said a school administrator checked her identification in Sydney at 4:12 p.m. That was not a contradiction one could explain with jet lag. It was a fracture running through the center of her life. Lenora knocked 3 times. "Did you find the remover?" I hid the original inside the hollow back of a framed photograph and placed the decoy on my desk. When I opened the door, she entered in cream silk and pearls, cruelty dressed as concern. "Your father is announcing the foundation appointment tonight," she said. "Journalists may come. We cannot leave childish failures lying around." I dabbed acetone across the copied sentence. The ink blurred. Lenora watched so closely she forgot to breathe. When only a gray stain remained, she tore the page into 4 pieces and dropped them into my wastebasket. Some things improve when they disappear. I studied her steady hands. You would know. Her head tilted, but I smiled before suspicion settled. She left believing the evidence was gone. I waited until her footsteps faded, then removed the original and sealed it in plastic. In my first life, obedience had made me feel safe for one afternoon. This time, deception did. Safety had never required surrendering the truth. In my first life, the foundation appointment had been the beginning of my ruin. My father, Adrian Quinn, planned to name me research director of the Miriam Hale Foundation, a charitable branch of Quinn Diagnostics established after my mother's death. I had trained as a molecular toxicologist partly because everyone told me I inherited her mind. Lenora had pretended to support me. Sloan had congratulated me. Within 6 months, forged transfers appeared under my credentials. Restricted compounds vanished from a partner laboratory. An anonymous complaint accused me of using foundation money to finance unauthorized experiments. I fought every allegation, but Lenora controlled the internal audit, and my father believed documents before daughters. When I tried to defend myself by reopening questions about my mother's death, Lenora produced her Zurich alibi and described me as unstable. She said grief had made me obsessive. Sloan testified that I had always resented their marriage. My father removed me from the foundation, then from the family trust. I was later charged after contaminated samples were discovered in a storage unit leased under my name. The case never reached trial. I collapsed in custody from a toxin my own research had taught me to identify, but the prison doctor called it an allergic reaction. In the hospital, Lenora visited after midnight. She stood beside my bed while my muscles failed and whispered, "You erased the only thing that could have made anyone listen." That sentence followed me into death. It was waiting when I returned. I did not begin with the police. Lenora had spent 2 decades donating equipment to police laboratories, sponsoring hospital wings, and building relationships with officials who used the phrase generous family friend. A single report card, however explosive, could be dismissed as a clerical error. I needed the card to become a door, not a conclusion. The brass key from Grandmother Iris's box was my first clue. It bore the number 314 on one side and the tiny engraved letters SAPA on the other. I searched privately and found the Sydney Academic Preservation Archive, a climate-controlled facility storing records from closed schools. St. Agnes Primary had shut down 12 years earlier after storm damage. Its paper registers, disciplinary logs, administrative correspondence, and staff files had been transferred to the archive. In my first life, I had never noticed the key. Lenora had taken the cedar box after my arrest, claiming the contents might distress me. Now I booked an appointment under my grandmother's estate authorization and told no one. Before leaving, I photographed the report card under natural, ultraviolet, and angled light. I uploaded encrypted copies to 3 separate accounts. Then I placed the original inside a waterproof document pouch, taped it beneath the lining of my handbag, and carried a different report card in the visible folder. Rebirth did not make me fearless. It made me respectful of how quickly evidence could burn. The archive occupied the basement of an old sandstone teacher's college. A woman named Priya Nan met me at security and examined the key. "Locker key," she said. "Private deposit collection." Grandmother Iris had rented locker 314 for 11 years. Priya led me through 2 coded doors into a narrow room lined with gray metal compartments. My key opened a drawer containing a sealed envelope, a cassette tape, and a school visitor ledger wrapped in archival tissue. My grandmother's handwriting covered the envelope, for Alara, only when she is ready to stop asking permission. My throat tightened, but grief could wait. Survival had taught me that emotion was safest after inventory. I opened the ledger first. October 18th. At 3:51 p.m., Lenora Pike had signed into St. Agnes Primary, listing her purpose as family emergency. At 4:14 p.m., she signed out with me. The signature matched the one on old corporate filings from before she married my father. A receptionist had added, "ID checked." The report card did not stand alone. It echoed an official log preserved by a neutral archive. Priya watched my expression change. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "There was," I said. 19 years ago. I photographed every page, then requested a certified digital copy and chain of custody statement. Priya told me certification would take 5 working days. 5 days felt dangerous. I paid for priority processing and asked her to restrict access to the file. Her eyes sharpened. "Family dispute? Possible homicide," I answered. She stopped treating me like a sentimental granddaughter. The envelope contained a letter from Miss Bell. She wrote that she had seen Lenora arrive at the school wearing a charcoal coat stained at one cuff with pale orange powder. She remembered the powder because my mother's laboratory used a distinctive fluorescent tracer during respiratory exposure tests. Miss Bell had asked whether Lenora came from the hospital. Lenora replied that she had come directly from the airport. Yet she smelled of smoke, and her hair was damp despite clear weather. She signed me out, gripped my shoulder hard enough to make me cry, and warned the office staff not to call my father because she would handle the emergency. Miss Bell later contacted police after hearing that Miriam had been injured in a ventilation failure at Quinn Diagnostics. An officer took her statement, but never returned. Months later, the school principal told her the matter had been resolved and advised her to stop upsetting a bereaved family. Miss Bell kept a copy of her statement. That copy was not in the envelope. At the bottom she wrote, "Iris knows where the rest is. Ask about the greenhouse." My grandmother's house had been sold after her death, but the greenhouse remained on the property until settlement. I had 48 hours before the buyers received possession. Suddenly 5 working days no longer felt like the problem. I called Tessa Ward, forensic accountant and old friend, asking her to drive me to grandmother's greenhouse immediately, not later. Grandmother's greenhouse stood behind a weatherboard house in Warunga, half swallowed by winter vines. The estate agent had locked the front gate, but I still had my grandmother's side door code. Inside, the air smelled of damp soil, rust, and rosemary. I remembered being 7, sitting beneath the potting bench while grandmother whispered that adults who insisted nothing happened were often describing what they had done. At the time, I thought she meant spilled milk. Tessa searched shelves while I examined the floor. Iris had loved puzzles, but hated wasted motion. Ask about the greenhouse did not mean search every flower pot. On the back wall hung a painted sign, "What needs light must first survive the dark." Beneath the word dark, one screw was newer than the others. I removed the sign and found a shallow cavity containing a waterproof tin. Inside lay Miss Bell's police statement, 2 instant photographs, and a small evidence bag holding a silver cuff link marked LQ. One photograph showed Lenora outside St. Agnes at 3:56 p.m. The school clock was visible behind her. The second showed my mother's laboratory loading bay at 3:18 p.m. A charcoal-coated woman was entering through a side door. Her face was turned away, but the coat, height, and pale scarf matched the school photograph. On the back, my grandmother had written, "Taken by Parking Inspector Daniel Cho." Original negatives held separately. Suddenly the greenhouse felt too quiet. Footsteps crunched outside. My father's security chief, Martin Vale, entered and glanced directly at the opened wall cavity. "Mrs. Quinn asked me to bring you home." His attention told me Lenora knew about the hiding place. Tessa lifted a garden trowel. Voluntarily, I asked as he blocked the door. Before he answered, a car horn sounded. Priya stood beyond the glass, filming us on her phone. She had followed after noticing the sedan near the archive. Martin stepped aside. "This is being misunderstood." "Explain it to the camera," Priya said. He left without touching us. Only afterward did Tessa tremble. We did not return to my father's house. Priya arranged secure storage for the ledger and greenhouse evidence through the archive's legal counsel. Tessa booked us into a small hotel under her cousin's name. I spent the night listening to the cassette from grandmother's locker through borrowed equipment. The tape began with static, then my mother's voice. I had forgotten its exact texture. Memory had made her sound softer, but the real Miriam Hale spoke quickly, clipped consonants when angry. "Iris, this is not paranoia," she said. "Lenora changed the ventilation trial parameters. Adrian thinks the irregularities are clerical. They are not. She wants the inhaled compound approved before the merger vote. I refused. If anything happens, the formula is in Alara's school file because it is the only place she cannot access without creating a record. Then my mother laughed once, bitterly. Imagine hiding a corporate crime inside a child's report card folder. The tape cut off. Tessa replayed the final sentence.
School file, she said.
Not report card. I understood. The report card was never the whole evidence. It was a map. St. Agnes had preserved cumulative student folders separately from administrative ledgers. Locker 314 gave us the visitor log, but my personal school file might still sit in the general collection. Lenora had asked me to erase the card because the release note exposed her presence. She may not have known my mother had hidden a formula nearby. Her panic had opened a second door. At 9 the next morning, Priya secured emergency access to the St. Agnes student records. My file contained attendance sheets, drawings, medical notices, and a sealed envelope stapled inside the rear cover. Across it my mother had written for the science fair judges, though no science fair had occurred that term. Inside were handwritten ventilation calculations, compound batch numbers, and a memo naming Lenora as the person who ordered a bypass of 2 safety alarms. There was also a photocopy of an internal email from Lenora. We need a manageable incident, not fatalities. A short exposure will pressure Adrian to replace Miriam before the vote. The sentence made my skin turn cold. My mother's death had not been the intended outcome. Lenora planned to injure her, discredit her, and seize control of the trial. But the exposure chamber pressure rose faster than expected. Miriam inhaled enough of the compound to suffer progressive organ failure. Lenora's alibi mattered because she had entered the laboratory shortly before the alarm system was disabled, then collected me from school to control what I might hear. She had not merely lied about Zurich. She had designed the emergency around our family's routines. My first report card, with its ordinary grades and anxious teacher comment, survived because no one understood the danger of mundane paper. Tessa verified the Zurich story. The symposium existed, but its photographs came from a sponsor reception held 3 weeks earlier. Organizers confirmed Lenora canceled her hotel room on October 18th. The passport page used in court was merely a photocopy supplied by company counsel, and a document examiner found digital alterations around the date. Daniel Cho, now retired, still held the original negatives and parking infringement, showing Lenora's car outside the laboratory. By noon, 5 independent systems contradicted her: school, council, conference, passport, and corporate records. Evidence was no longer the problem. Visibility was. Lenora could smother a private accusation through lawyers and influence. I needed her to repeat the Zurich claim publicly, after every original was secured, but before she learned how much had survived. Then expose her revision. The Foundation Gala was scheduled for that evening at the Quinn Diagnostics Atrium. My father intended to announce my appointment before investors, researchers, journalists, and donors. In my first life, I accepted the role in a white dress Lenora selected. The photographs later appeared beside headlines calling me the disgraced daughter who stole from her mother's charity. This time, I wore black. Tessa objected that it looked like funeral clothing. It is, I said. Just not mine. Priya's legal counsel had already delivered sealed evidence packages to an independent barrister and 2 investigative reporters. Daniel Cho agreed to appear by video if necessary. Miss Bell was being located. The police had not yet been contacted because I wanted the Economic Crimes Unit, not local officers connected to my family's donations. Every hour we delayed carried risk, but the gala gave us leverage. Lenora could suppress a private accusation. She could not easily erase a statement made before cameras, shareholders, and a live-streamed audience. My plan was simple enough to sound reckless. Allow her to celebrate the alibi, then remove it piece by piece. When I entered the atrium, my father met me with relief sharpened by anger. Martin said you behaved irrationally. Martin searched grandmother's greenhouse. Adrian Quinn could identify microscopic defects in a sample, yet treated defects in his marriage as insults. Lenora approached in silver, carrying concern like a ceremonial object. Alara, You frightened us. Her gaze searched my dress for the report card. Grandmother left more than expected, I said. Her fingers tightened around her glass. Sloane whispered that I was making the evening awkward. I asked Lenora, "Where were you on October 18th, 19 years ago?" "Zurich," she answered instantly. "Please repeat that when the microphones are on." 20 minutes later, my father praised legacy, integrity, and scientific responsibility beneath a suspended DNA sculpture. The irony needed absolutely no assistance. When he invited me forward, I placed the approved speech aside and faced the live stream camera. My first report card said I rushed when frightened. I began. Polite laughter flickered. My teacher was right. For 19 years, this family rushed past the afternoon my mother was poisoned because one woman offered an alibi and everyone preferred relief to scrutiny. My father moved toward me. I raised my hand. "Do not interrupt. You gave me this platform to honor Dr. Miriam Hale. I am finally going to do it." Behind me, the prepared screen went black, then displayed a yellowed school card. Across the front row, Lenora's expression held perfectly still. Only the champagne trembled against the rim in her hand. A screen behind me displayed the front of the report card. Childish grades, stamped school crest, my teacher's careful handwriting. Lenora did not move until I showed the reverse. Then the color drained from her face so quickly that Sloane reached for her arm. I read the release note aloud. Student released at 4:12 p.m. to Ms. Lenora Pike after emergency call regarding Dr. Miriam Hale. Identification confirmed by office. A murmur rolled across the atrium. My father stared at the image, then at Lenora. She recovered within seconds. "A clerical mistake," she said, loud enough to carry. "I was in Zurich. Everyone here knows that." I had expected denial. What I had not expected was Sloane rising beside her and saying, "I remember the trip." She was 24, which meant she had not been born at the time. Several people noticed. Sloane realized it a moment too late. Her cheeks reddened. "I mean, I remember Mother telling me about it." The perfect daughter had offered testimony from 19 years before her birth. Lenora stood. "This is grief theater. Alara has always struggled with obsessive thinking." Her voice remained controlled, but she was crushing the stem of her glass between two fingers. I displayed the certified visitor ledger. Her signature appeared at 3:51 p.m., followed by the notation that her identification had been checked. Then came the school photograph with its visible clock. Then Daniel Cho's parking infringement, issued outside my mother's laboratory at 3:22 p.m. Each item appeared with certification details and storage history. I did not dramatize them. Dates are most frightening when spoken plainly. Lenora challenged the signature. I showed 3 corporate filings bearing the same formation of the L, the same downward pressure on the P, the same unusual break before the final E. She challenged the photograph. Daniel appeared on screen from Newcastle, held up the original negative envelope, and described her argument with him beside the loading bay. She challenged his memory. The infringement number led to a council database entry created that day. She turned to my father. "Adrian, stop this." He did not. For once, uncertainty had become stronger than his instinct to protect her. Then Lenora made the mistake I needed. "Even if I returned early," she said, "that proves nothing except that I collected a frightened child after Miriam's accident." The atrium went still. My father whispered, "Returned early?" Lenora's eyes closed for less than a second. Her official position had never allowed an early return. She had claimed she remained in Zurich until 2 days after the exposure and learned of it by telephone. I leaned toward the microphone. "Thank you for revising your alibi in public." 2 reporters in the rear raised their phones higher. Lenora's composure cracked at the edges. "You are twisting my words. Then clarify them. Were you in Zurich at 3:22 p.m.? My travel records. Were you outside the laboratory? I will not submit to an interrogation by a disturbed girl. I am 26. Then stop behaving like the abandoned 7-year-old you have always been." That sentence hurt. Rebirth had not removed the child inside me. It merely gave her an adult witness. I let the silence expose Lenora's cruelty before I answered. I was not abandoned. My mother was taken from me. There is a difference, and tonight we are naming it. My father climbed the steps and reached for the lectern microphone. This event is over, he said. Any legitimate evidence will be reviewed privately. There it was, the family reflex. Close the doors. Lower the voices. Translate truth into a process controlled by Quinn Diagnostics. In my first life, I mistook privacy for dignity. Now I turned off the lectern microphone and spoke loudly enough without it. The evidence is no longer private. Certified copies were delivered this afternoon to independent counsel, the State Economic Crimes Unit, the medical regulator, and 3 news organizations. The live stream has been mirrored outside company servers. Martin touched his earpiece and moved toward the control booth. Tessa, seated near the aisle, lifted her phone. Already backed up, she called. Several guests laughed nervously. My father looked at me, as though I had slapped him. You exposed this company without consulting me. I exposed evidence, because consulting you buried it the first time. He flinched. I had not yet shown Miss Bell's statement, my mother's recording, or the internal memo. The report card had broken Lenora's alibi. The next evidence would reveal what the alibi concealed. The screen changed to my mother's ventilation calculations. I explained the bypass alarms and the batch numbers in language the public could understand. Quinn Diagnostics had been preparing an inhaled compound for merger review. Miriam discovered the safety data had been manipulated. Lenora, then an operations strategist, ordered a controlled exposure intended to injure and discredit her. I displayed the copied email. We need a manageable incident, not fatalities. A short exposure will pressure Adrian to replace Miriam before the vote. My father's face folded inward. That is not authentic, Lenora said. Her voice finally shook. Miriam fabricated it because she hated me. The printout was sealed in my school file before her exposure. Anyone could have placed it there later. Priya stepped onto the stage. She explained the archive transfer, staple oxidation, paper aging, and custody record. The envelope had remained attached to the file for years before grandmother gained access. Lenora shifted tactics again. Iris planted it. Priya replied, then Mrs. Hale would have needed to counterfeit aging across 4 paper types, predict archival humidity changes, recreate a discontinued toner pattern, and insert the envelope before the school closure inventory. That is not impossible in a fantasy novel. It is not supported here. A surprised ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Lenora hated being ridiculous more than being accused. Sloane rose suddenly. Stop. Tears shone in her eyes, but her voice was aimed at me, not Lenora. You planned this. You came here dressed for a funeral and humiliated us in front of everyone. Us? I asked. She is my mother. Miriam was mine. That does not give you the right to destroy my life. The accusation was so familiar that for one dangerous moment I almost accepted it. In my first life, Sloane's pain had been Lenora's shield. Every consequence became something I inflicted on my younger sister. Then I noticed the bracelet on Sloane's wrist, a narrow platinum chain with a black enamel clasp. I had seen it before on the night I died. Sloane wore it in the hospital corridor when she told the guard she was bringing me clean clothes. The poison entered my intravenous line less than an hour later. My planned speech vanished from my mind. Where did you get that bracelet? I asked. She looked down. Mother gave it to me. When? Years ago. Take it off. What? Take it off now. Lenora moved, for the first time with open panic. Ilara, this is absurd. That was why I knew it mattered. Sloane backed away, clutching her wrist. I descended from the stage. The bracelet was not jewelry from a normal collection. The clasp resembled a micro-sample capsule used by Quinn Diagnostics field researchers. In my first life, I had designed an improved version for transporting unstable compounds. Lenora later claimed the prototype was missing. I had been blamed. I remembered Sloane touching my hospital blanket, apologizing, then leaving before my breathing failed. That clasp can hold liquid, I said. Sloane stared at her mother. You said it was perfume. The room changed. Until then, Sloane had defended Lenora from instinct. Now fear separated them. Lenora stepped forward. Give it to me. Sloane stepped back.
Why?
Because your sister is manipulating you. You told me to wear it when I visited her. Lenora's face emptied. My father looked between them. Visited her where? The question belonged to another life, but Sloane answered as though the memory had been waiting inside her body too. I had a dream, she whispered.
No.
Not a dream. A hospital. Alara was sick. Mother told me the clasp contained something that would calm her if I pressed it into the line. My rebirth had never come with rules. I did not know whether others could remember fragments of the first life, whether trauma leaked across whatever boundary had returned me, or whether Sloane was describing a plan Lenora had already prepared in this timeline. But Lenora reacted before logic could protect her. She lunged for the bracelet. Martin intercepted her automatically, catching her forearm. The clasp snapped against Sloane's wrist, and a clear droplet appeared along the seam. Tessa shouted for nobody to touch it. Two medical researchers nearby moved guests back, while Priya placed an unused glass over the bracelet where it had fallen. Lenora twisted against Martin. It is nothing. Then why did you reach for it? I asked. She stopped struggling. For the first time that evening, she looked directly at me without performance. Hatred stripped years from her face. Because you never leave things buried, she said. My mother's report card, the school file, the greenhouse tin, my own death. Lenora had spent her life confusing burial with disappearance. Security sealed the atrium while emergency services were called. Martin, perhaps understanding that loyalty to Lenora could now make him an accomplice, handed his weapon and phone to another guard and kept her seated. Sloane stood apart, trembling. My father tried to approach her, but she recoiled from both parents. I wanted to comfort her. I also wanted answers. Those desires did not cancel each other. Did Mother ever ask you to sign documents for the foundation? I asked. Sloane wiped her face. Yes. Lenora said sharply. Do not speak. Martin tightened his grip on her shoulder. Sloane continued. She said they were routine approvals. Sometimes blank signature pages, because the auditors changed formatting. In my first life, forged transfers had carried my digital credentials, but supporting approvals bore Sloane's signature. I had assumed she knowingly helped frame me. Perhaps she had been used too. Did she keep my old identification files? I asked. Sloane nodded. In the blue cabinet in her office. She said it was for estate planning. Tessa was already messaging the independent barrister. The evening had begun as an attack on a 19-year-old alibi. It was becoming a map of crimes Lenora had not committed yet in this life, but had prepared to commit. Police arrived with hazardous materials specialists and detectives from 2 units because the reporters had already published the first evidence. The bracelet was secured for testing. Lenora demanded her lawyer. She did not confess, and I did not expect her to. Confessions are overrated. They allow guilty people to become the center of the truth one last time. Records were better. Records did not ask for sympathy. Officers escorted her through the atrium while cameras flashed. At the eastern doors, she stopped and looked back at my father. Tell them I was with you, she said. It was reflexive, almost intimate. Give me another alibi. Adrian opened his mouth. For one terrifying second, I thought he would obey. Then he saw the report card still projected behind the empty stage. I do not know where you were, he said. Lenora's expression changed more at that sentence than at the handcuffs. Her power had depended on witnesses who preferred certainty to truth. My father had not chosen me. He had simply refused to lie for her. It was a small moral act arriving 19 years late, but it was enough to leave her alone inside her own timeline. The gala guests dispersed after midnight. News vans crowded the street. Quinn Diagnostics shares were temporarily halted before markets opened overseas. My father sat in the front row beneath the dark screen, shoulders bent. He asked me to join him. I remained standing. Did you know? I asked. No, did you suspect? He stared at the floor. That was an answer. He had noticed irregularities after my mother's exposure. Altered safety logs, missing samples, Lenora's unexpected return. He accepted the Zurich documents because the merger depended on stability and because believing Lenora was easier than admitting he had invited danger into the company. Grandmother Iris pushed him to reopen the investigation. He threatened to restrict her access to me if she continued. I thought she was using her grief, he said. She was using hers, I replied. He covered his face. I felt no triumph. Revenge stories often promise a moment when the person who failed you finally understands the scale of the damage. They rarely mention that understanding cannot travel backward. My mother remained dead. My first life remained stolen. My father's regret could not become a childhood. He offered to resign and transfer voting control to me. In my first life, I would have wanted that victory. I had imagined taking his chair, his company, his certainty. Standing in the wreckage of the gala, I understood that inheriting a poisoned structure was not the same as justice. The board will appoint an independent administrator, I said. The Miriam Hale Foundation will separate from Quinn Diagnostics. All trial data will be reviewed externally. Compensation will be offered to every participant exposed through manipulated protocols. He looked up. You cannot decide that alone. Neither could Lenora, yet you allowed her to. I placed the prepared legal petition beside him. Minority shareholders, research partners, and foundation trustees had already signed conditional support. Tessa had spent the afternoon arranging what my father assumed required his permission. He read the first page, stunned. You planned for the company to survive without me. I planned for the truth to survive all of you. That was the first time he understood I had not returned to become his daughter again. At dawn, I met Sloane on the hospital observation floor after specialists confirmed she had not absorbed the substance from the bracelet. Preliminary testing identified a concentrated paralytic research compound, stable inside the sealed clasp. It matched the class of toxin that killed me in my first life. In this timeline, the compound had been manufactured but not yet used. Lenora had carried a future murder in her jewelry box, waiting for the circumstances she intended to create. Sloane sat wrapped in a gray blanket, her makeup washed away. I remembered more, she said. At the hospital, you looked at me like you knew I was lying. I pressed the clasp because Mother said you would expose us both. Then you could not breathe. Her words came apart. Did I kill you? I sat beside her without touching her. You helped her. She flinched. I continued before mercy could turn into dishonesty. You also believed her. Both things are true. Can you forgive me? Not today. She nodded as if the answer hurt less than false comfort. What can I do? Tell the detectives everything. Do not protect me, Father, or yourself. Start there. Miss Bell was found that afternoon in an assisted living community near Parramatta. She was 81, sharp-eyed, and furious that it had taken us so long. When I entered her room, she studied me for several seconds before saying, "Your handwriting improved." I laughed and cried at once. She had kept another copy of her police statement inside a children's atlas because Grandmother Iris warned her official files might disappear. She remembered Lenora collecting me, the orange tracer on her cuff, and my insistence that I had seen the Silver Lady near my mother's laboratory that morning. Lenora wore a silver scarf. Miss Bell documented my words because she believed children often described accurately before adults taught them which details were inconvenient. Why did you write that I was unusually alert to changes in adult behavior? I asked. Because you were, she said. And because the adults around you were behaving very badly. She asked whether I still had the report card. I showed her the protected original. Her fingers hovered above the paper, without touching it. Your grandmother made me promise this would reach you. She could have given it to me earlier. She tried. You kept returning everything to your father for approval. The truth was gentle and devastating. In my first life, I had been handed exits and called them disloyalty. Over the next 6 months, the investigation turned the report card's single timestamp into a complete route. A parking camera captured Lenora's car entering the laboratory road at 3:18. Daniel issued the infringement at 3:22. Her operations code bypassed the alarms at 3:31. She signed into St. Agnes at 3:51 and collected me at 4:12. At 5:03, She called my father from a public telephone and claimed she was in Zurich. Investigators also found blank forms signed by Sloan, copies of my identification, shell company plans, and a prepared audit designed to frame me for theft. Martin surrendered messages ordering him to recover school material from the greenhouse. My father resigned after an independent review found he ignored compliance warnings and chose institutional stability over questions he did not want answered. At trial, prosecutors opened with the report card. Lenora's lawyers attacked memory, custody, ink, aging, and motive, but independent records kept returning to the same afternoon. When her lawyer asked whether hatred motivated me, I answered, revenge motivated me to look. Evidence determined what I found. He asked why I preserved the card after Lenora ordered me to erase it. Because the first time I obeyed, she survived the truth. Sloan testified that loyalty had taught her to repeat stories she never remembered and sign pages she never read. The defense finally proposed that Lenora flew secretly from Zurich by private charter. That theory destroyed the conference photographs supporting her original alibi. If the photographs were contemporaneous, she could not be in Sydney. If staged earlier, the alibi was fabricated. Their expert conceded both could not be true. The jury convicted Lenora of manslaughter, conspiracy to pervert justice, evidence tampering, corporate fraud offenses, and possessing the paralytic compound for a serious crime. As officers led her away, she mouthed, "You should have erased it." I shook my head. Afterward, the Miriam Hale Foundation reopened as an independent research trust with external audits and public records. Tessa became Chief Integrity Officer. Priya joined the Records Committee. Miss Bell corrected the grammar on our opening brochure. Sloan entered a coercive control support program and began rebuilding her life, without asking me to pretend the past was harmless. We spoke slowly, and sometimes badly. Repair, unlike revelation, refused to happen in one dramatic scene. My father moved into a small apartment and wrote apologies naming specific failures rather than praising his intentions. I read them without promising absolution. One contained a note my mother had hidden inside a laboratory manual. Alara will inherit our curiosity. Make sure she does not inherit our silence. His letters did not repair us, but they stopped pretending repair required my silence. I answered some, ignored others, and allowed distance to remain where trust had once been demanded. For the first time, our relationship contained boundaries neither guilt nor wealth could purchase, negotiate, or quietly remove ever again. Rebirth had not given me perfect courage or guaranteed justice. It gave me memory, another choice, and the chance to stop returning my own judgment to people who had already misused it. The verdict did not restore my mother, and it did not transform my childhood. Justice was narrower than fantasy, but stronger than denial. It named what could be proved, preserved what others tried to erase, and prevented Lenora's prepared crimes from becoming my second fate. Miss Bell reminded me that accuracy matters more than satisfying endings. Grandmother Iris understood the same lesson. She did not leave me a weapon. She left me records, witnesses, and one instruction hidden inside every object: stop asking permission to believe what you saw. I framed my first report card in the Foundation archive, but not in the public lobby. It belonged in a reading room where researchers could request it, examine the certification, and see how ordinary records become protection when institutions preserve them. On the wall beside it, I placed a short inscription. This document survived because someone believed a child's day was worth recording accurately. I kept the red C visible. Visitors sometimes asked whether I felt embarrassed by it. I told them no. My handwriting improved. My fear changed shape. The grade was never the stain. On the first anniversary of the verdict, I visited Grandmother Iris's greenhouse. The buyers had restored it and allowed me inside for an hour. Rosemary climbed the back wall again. The sign remained above the repaired cavity. What needs light must first survive the dark. I sat beneath the potting bench where I had hidden as a child and read Miss Bell's original comment aloud. Alara is observant, imaginative, and unusually alert to changes in adult behavior. For most of my life, Lenora treated those qualities as symptoms. My father treated them as inconveniences. My grandmother treated them as tools. I finally treated them as mine. Before leaving, I took a pencil from my bag and wrote one sentence on a blank card for the archive's future collection. Not every record needs to be perfect. It only needs to remain. I signed my name beneath it, pressed hard enough to leave an impression on the page below, and laughed when I noticed what I had done. Some evidence announces itself in ink. Some waits in pressure marks. Some lives inside a frightened girl who remembers being told to erase what another woman cannot afford to explain. Lenora had believed the report card was dangerous because it proved where she had been. She was wrong. Its greatest danger was proving that I had been there too, a child collected from school, watching adults revise the world around her, learning to doubt the details she noticed. The card did not restore my mother or return the years stolen in either life. It did something smaller and, in the end, more permanent. It gave the truth a timestamp. Once that timestamp held, every polished photograph, every donated hospital wing, every rehearsed sentence, and every borrowed witness had to arrange itself around 4:12 p.m. None of them could. That was how her alibi collapsed. Not with a scream. Not with a confession. Not even with the handcuffs closing beneath the gala lights. It collapsed when a faded piece of school paper refused to forget a woman's name, and when I finally refused to erase mine.